You ever spend a full season running a feeder, checking cameras, burning weekends, and killing almost nothing while the guy 3 properties over is stacking hogs every single time out? That was me for the first 4 years I hunted hogs seriously. I had decent gear, a reliable feeder, corn out year-round, and a cell cam that sent me photos of empty fields at 2 in the morning. I was doing everything I thought was right and going home with nothing to show for it more often than not. Then I met a 79-year-old named Earl Spivey on a lease in Lavaca County, Texas. And inside of one afternoon, he identified 5 things I was doing wrong that I didn't even know were decisions. I want to be clear about something before we get into what Earl taught me. I'm not going to dress this up as some magical transformation where one conversation turned me into a hog hunting machine overnight. It took me 2 full seasons to properly implement everything he laid out. Some of it I tried once, got it wrong, and had to circle back. Some of it went against things I'd read online so hard that I resisted it for longer than I should have. But the results over time were real. My kill rate over a feeder roughly quadrupled once the system was working the way he described it. I kept a notebook that season, and I still have it. I'll reference specific numbers from it, but I'll frame them as what they are. My data, my property, not a controlled study. Your terrain is different, your hog pressure is different, your results may vary. What I can tell you is that nothing else moved the needle for me the way this did, and I've tried most of what's out there. Earl had been hunting hogs on his family's property in Lavaca County since the late 1960s. He wasn't a YouTube hunter, wasn't on any forum, didn't own thermal optics, and didn't care about any of it. He killed hogs with a .30, -0, 6 Savage, and a flashlight until his knees got bad and he switched to a box blind. He had been watching hogs long enough that he thought about them differently than anyone I'd talked to before. And the first thing he said to me when he walked my feeder setup was, "You're hunting these things like they're whitetails. That's your whole problem right there." He wasn't wrong. I had set up my feeder the way I would a deer feeder, roughly 20 yards from a stand tree, centered in a clearing, timer set for dawn and dusk, checking my camera every few days. The logic that works reasonably well for whitetails was actively working against me for hogs, and he walked me through exactly why. Stick around to the end because there's one piece Earl saved for last, the thing he called his lock setup, that I've never heard anyone else describe the same way, and it's been the single most consistent producer in my rotation for the past 6 years. The first thing Earl pointed out was where I was entering. I was walking in from the road along the easiest path, which happened to put me slightly upwind of the feeder on most mornings. "Deer might give you that," he said. "Hogs won't." He had a specific way of explaining the difference. A whitetail, when it smells something wrong, tends to hold, circle, or slowly back off. It's a cautious animal by nature. A hog, when it smells, you has one setting: gone. And not just gone from the night. Gone for 3 to 5 nights minimum on a pressured property. Every approach that dropped my scent upwind of the feeder wasn't just costing me that hunt, it was costing me the next 4. I'd been burning down my own setup repeatedly without understanding it. Earl's rule was simple. You enter and exit from the same direction the wind is coming from. No exceptions, no matter how far it adds to your walk. If that means parking on a different road and hiking an extra half mile, you hike the half mile. The hogs will be there when you arrive. They won't if you cut corners. Something worth adding on the entry route piece. It is not just about the wind on the morning you hunt. It is about the accumulation of entries over time. Every time you walk that same path in from the wrong direction, you deepen a scent corridor that the hogs start to recognize as a human travel route. After enough repetitions, mature hogs on that property stop using the zone around your entry path altogether, regardless of what you have on the feeder. Earl called it poisoning the ground. Once you poison it, you have to rest the entire setup for 3 weeks minimum, not just the feeder location, before the hog memory resets. I poisoned 2 of my setups before I understood this, and spent weeks wondering why perfectly good bait sites went completely dead. I walked right in and killed both of them without realizing it. The second problem was camera placement and check frequency. I was checking my cell cam every 3 to 4 days and walking directly to the post to clear vegetation or adjust the angle when I did. Earl looked at my setup and just shook his head. "You're walking right to the one spot that matters most and leaving yourself all over it," he said. That was the whole diagnosis. Every check deposited my scent exactly where the hogs were feeding. training them to associate that location with human smell at ground level, which is exactly how a hog processes information. Their nose operates close to the ground. They're not smelling you at chest height the way a deer does. They're reading the ground. Every footprint I'd left near that post was a record of my presence that lasted days. His recommendation was to switch to a cell cam I never had to visit, aimed and adjusted once and left completely alone, and to check it only from the truck with my phone. I'd already had a cell cam the whole time. I just kept walking to it anyway, out of habit. That habit cost me more setups than I'll ever be able to count. Third was feeder placement itself. My feeder was in a clearing because clearings seemed logical. Earl's feeders were always at the edge of cover, never in the middle of open ground. The reason isn't complicated once he explained it. Hogs are cautious about committing to open space, especially sounders with shoats. A dominant sow leads her group and she wants an exit route. A feeder dropped in the middle of a field with no cover. Within 50 yards makes her nervous, and she'll feed the edges and eventually move on. A feeder tucked where the pines meet the creek bottom, or where the brush line meets the field edge, gives her the security she needs to commit and bring the group in fully. I moved 2 of my setups after that conversation, and within 2 weeks both were showing dramatically more visits than they had all season. I won't give you a specific number because I don't want to oversell what might have partly been a timing shift, but the pattern change was obvious enough that I wrote it down in the notebook that same week. Tricks like these plus 65 more are what I organized into the Hog Hunter's Bible. 80 field-tested techniques, each with the reasoning behind it so you know why it works, not just what to do. Bait science, feeder timing, trap pre-baiting, night hunting setups, and a chapter on reading hog behavior when they get educated and stop showing up during daylight. 1-page field reference in the back you can print and take with you. Links in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen if you're watching on a TV. The 4th thing Earl fixed was my bait rotation. I had been running the same straight corn out of the same feeder for 2 full seasons. He asked me when I'd last changed anything about the pile, and I told him honestly, never. Hogs get bored, he said, and I thought he was joking. He wasn't. What he actually meant, put in less folksy terms, is that a food source that never changes becomes background noise to a sounder that's been working it for months. They'll still eat it, but it doesn't pull them the way a new or changed scent does. His rotation was simple, plain corn for the base. Then, every 2 to 3 weeks, he'd change the additive. Sour corn one cycle, then Kool-Aid and sugar, then peanut butter mixed into the whole, then back to sour corn. Not because any one additive was dramatically better than the others, but because the change itself triggered renewed curiosity. He described watching hogs approach a refreshed pile with a completely different body posture than they used approaching plain corn they'd been eating for 6 weeks. More cautious, more investigative, more time on site. More time on site means more opportunity. That rotation principle was something I'd never read anywhere, and I've since seen it referenced once on a Beauregard Parish, Louisiana, hunting group, with almost no explanation of why it worked. Earl understood the mechanism even if he couldn't have named the olfactory science behind it. The 5th thing was the one that took me the longest to accept, because it required the most patience, and patience is not something I have in abundance when I've got a loaded rifle and a feeder 60 yards away. Earl's rule was, never hunt a feeder the first night after a refresh. Always wait 1 full night. His reasoning was that the first night after you've been in there, moving things around and adding bait, your scent is all over the site. The hogs that come in that night are coming, despite your presence signature, which means they're the least educated, least pressured animals in the area, the ones that haven't yet learned to associate that location with human activity. By the 2nd night, your ground scent has settled or dissipated, and the fresh bait smell is dominant. The hogs that were checking from a distance on night 1 commit more fully on night 2. The 3rd and 4th nights, if you haven't hunted it, are the peak window. He said he never hunted a feeder the first night after a refresh in 40 years, and I laughed at him. Then I tried it both ways on 2 different setups, same week, same conditions, and the night 2 and night 3 sits produced twice the activity of the night. One sits across 3 consecutive rotations. That's not science. That's a pattern I observed on my own cameras, and I'll call it what it is. But it's consistent enough that I don't hunt night 1 anymore on any setup. There's a thread on Texas Hunting Forum from a hunter in Jasper County who documented almost this exact principle over a full season comparing first night visits to second and third night visits after fresh bait across 4 different feeder locations on his property. He posted his raw camera counts. Night 1 averaged lower committed sounder visits than nights 2 and 3 across all 4 locations every single rotation he tracked. He ran that for 6 months. I found that thread about a year after Earl told me the same thing, and it felt like confirmation of something I'd already observed rather than new information. That's the kind of data point that makes you trust the old man. Now, one honest caveat before we keep going: none of these 5 things worked as well for me on heavily pressured public land adjacent tracts as they did on private ground with controlled access. On public land adjacent properties where there's constant neighboring pressure, the hogs have been educated by multiple different hunters using different approaches, and the nocturnal shift is almost complete year-round. Earl's system was built for private land with managed access. If you're hunting a WMA or a public tract, some of these principles still apply, but you'll need to be more aggressive about reducing pressure indicators and more patient about the timeline before you see results. Check your public land regulations before you run any of this too, because baiting rules on public ground vary significantly by state and by management unit. Before I get to the lock setup, I want to spend a minute on something Earl said that did not make sense to me until the second season I applied it. He said that hog hunting is not really hunting in the traditional sense. It is closer to farming. You are managing a resource on a piece of ground, not chasing a specific animal. Deer hunters get attached to individual bucks, pattern them, obsess over specific animals for months. Earl said that thinking costs you hogs because hogs are not individuals in the same way. The sounder is the unit. The dominant sow is the decision maker. Kill the right animal at the right time, and the sounder rebuilds its pattern within days. Kill the wrong one at the wrong time, and you scatter them for weeks. The whole mental model of what you are doing has to shift from wanting to kill that big boar on camera to keeping a sounder on a productive pattern that gives you consistent shooting opportunities all season. Those are 2 completely different games, and most hunters are playing the wrong one. The thing that changed my approach more than any of the 5 individual adjustments was what Earl called thinking in weeks instead of nights. Most hunters, myself included at that point, evaluated each hunt in isolation. Good night, bad night, saw some hogs, saw nothing. Earl evaluated setups across 3-week windows. He'd say, that feeder is down this week, meaning it hadn't produced in several days, and he wouldn't hunt it. He'd say, that feeder is building, meaning activity was increasing over the previous 7 days, and he'd plan to hunt it on the night he calculated would be the peak. That weekly thinking changed how I looked at my camera data completely. Instead of asking, did anything show up last night, I started asking, is activity on this site trending up or down over the last 10 days? A site trending up gets hunted. A site trending flat or down gets rested or refreshed. That sounds obvious when you write it out, but almost nobody hunts that way. They hunt when they have a free night, not when the pattern says the setup is peaking. This system and 65 more field-tested techniques are all in the Hog Hunter's Bible. 80 tricks total, every one of them with the biology behind it, so you're not just copying steps blindly. Bait science, feeder placement, trap pre-baiting, night hunting setups, and a chapter on hog behavior under pressure. 1-page field reference card in the back. Links in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen. The weekly thinking framework also changed how I handled pressure recovery. Before Earl, when I blew a setup by walking in wrong or hunting it too soon, I'd go back the next available night because I didn't want to waste the corn. Earl's rule was 10 days minimum after any hunt that spooked animals. Not 3 days, not a week. 10 days minimum on a pressured property before you go back. The corn you're burning during those 10 days is cheap compared to the cost of resetting an educated sounder that has now associated your specific site with danger. The big sow remembers. She'll lead the group around it for weeks if you push too hard. The 10-day rule felt brutal to me when I was burning through weekends, but I ran the comparison over a full season. Setups where I waited 10 days after pressure averaged more visits on the return hunt than setups where I went back in 4 or 5 days. Not every time, but consistently enough that I stopped second-guessing it. My wife had stronger opinions about the 10-day rule than I did, because it meant I was home more weekends than usual that November. She has since revised her position on the matter. Now, here's what Earl saved for last, the piece I mentioned at the start. He called it the lock setup, and the reason I've never heard it described the same way anywhere else is that it combines three things most hunters treat as separate decisions into one integrated system. The lock setup works like this. You run 2 feeders on the same property, set 200 to 250 yards apart, roughly the distance of 2.5 football fields end to end, with a natural funnel between them. A creek crossing, a fence gap, a brush point, anything that forces movement through one specific corridor when hogs travel between the 2 sites. The key is that you never hunt either feeder directly. You hunt the funnel between them. The hogs work both feeders over the course of a night, and when they move from one to the other, they have to pass through your shooting lane. You're not ambushing the feed, you're ambushing the travel. Earl had run this setup for years on a property in Fayette County, where the main sounder had gotten so feeder educated from years of hunting pressure that they were approaching the bait from unpredictable directions and almost never coming in during legal light. The funnel hunt bypassed the feeder education entirely because the hogs weren't being targeted at a location they associated with pressure. They were just moving naturally between food sources the way they always had. The funnel between 2 feeders is a place they don't associate with anything dangerous. That's where you kill them. I set up Earl's lock system on a creek bottom property in Hardin County the following season. 2 feeders, roughly 230 yards apart, about 2.5 football fields end to end, with a creek crossing between them that was the only practical gap in a brushy fence line running through that stretch of bottom. I hunted the creek crossing 12 times that season, from a hang-on stand at 15 feet on the downwind side. I killed hogs on 8 of those 12 sites, including the biggest boar I have ever shot off that property, a dark-colored Texas razorback that came through the crossing at 6:40 in the morning, following a sounder of 7 that had fed at the east feeder and were moving toward the west one. He came through alone about 4 minutes behind them. I had been on that stand for 3 hours, and I was almost to the point of climbing down when I heard him in the brush. Patience. Always more patience than you think you need. The notebook entry from that morning says I sat back down about 90 seconds before he stepped into the crossing. One of the 8 kills that season almost did not happen because I got impatient. The other 7 almost did not happen for the same reason. Hunting a funnel between 2 feeders requires you to accept that you may sit for 2 or 3 hours with 0 visible activity, while both feeders are getting worked just out of sight. The hogs are there. They just have not moved between sites yet. That waiting is the whole job. The practical setup for the funnel, you need to identify the natural travel corridor before you place the second feeder. Put the feeders in positions that make the funnel the most logical route between them, not the other way around. Spend time on the property without hunting it, walk the terrain, find where the hogs are already moving at ground level, the rooting trails, the wallows, the fence crossings with fresh tracks. Then build your 2 feeder system around the corridor that's already there. Forcing hogs through an artificial funnel that isn't on their natural travel route doesn't work. Using their existing movement and making it productive for you does. That's the whole principle, and it's the same thing Earl was describing when he said, the biggest mistake young hunters make is trying to pull hogs to where they want them, instead of hunting where the hogs already want to be. One more honest thing, before I close this out. Everything I've described in this video came from one afternoon with a 79-year-old man who had never made a YouTube video, never posted on a forum, and wouldn't have known what a cell cam was if I'd handed him one. He learned all of it by spending more time in the field over more decades than most of us will ever accumulate. The guys with the best hog hunting knowledge I've ever encountered are almost never the ones with the biggest online presence. They're the ones who've been quiet about it for 40 years, because it never occurred to them that anyone would want to watch. If you're lucky enough to know someone like that, spend the time. Ask the questions. Take notes. The notebook I kept from that afternoon in Lavaca County is still the most useful single document I have on hog hunting, more useful than anything I've found online, including, I'll admit, most of my own videos. Try the feeder edge placement this week if you have not already. Move your feeder from the middle of the clearing to where the cover meets the open ground, about 10 to 15 feet inside the brush line, close enough to the clearing that there is still a shooting lane, but far enough that the dominant sow has a wall of cover behind her when she commits. Check your entry route relative to the prevailing wind. If you are walking in with the wind at your back on most mornings, you have been hunting into your own scent, and everything else you are doing is fighting that mistake from the start. Set a 10-day rest on any setup you have hunted hard this month, and use that time to glass the property from a distance. Watch where the sounders are entering and exiting at dusk, and identify the natural funnels. Then plan Earl's lock setup around the funnel you find, not around where the corn is cheapest to run or the tree is easiest to climb. And when you set it up and sit it for the first time, and an hour goes by with nothing moving through the funnel, do not climb down. Just stay. The hogs are working both feeders out of sight, and the travel between them is coming. Earl said that more often than not, the best kill of the night happened in the last 20 minutes before you would have given up. He said that in 40 years of doing it, he never once regretted staying longer. He regretted climbing down early plenty of times. That particular lesson I only had to learn once.